I remember the first time I truly noticed her, not just as a presence in a room but as a force that drew everything toward itself. It was one of those ordinary mornings that, at the time, seemed destined to pass without mark. The light filtered through the half-closed blinds, casting slanted stripes across the floor, the kind that made dust motes hang in the air like tiny suspended planets. I had been sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had already gone lukewarm, staring absent-mindedly at the steam curling above the cup. The sound of footsteps, soft and deliberate, crossed the apartment hallway, and there she was. Not a grand entrance, not a flash of brilliance, just her, moving with a quiet certainty that somehow managed to make the world feel both larger and smaller at the same time. My attention, unbidden, followed her. The curve of her shoulders, the gentle tilt of her head, the way her fingers brushed against the edge of the counter. Everything spoke in a language I didn't yet understand but was desperate to learn. From that moment, an almost invisible thread tied me to her. It wasn't passion in the cinematic sense. It wasn't fireworks or a violent storm of emotion. It was more subtle, almost imperceptible at first. A sense of recognition, like finding something you didn't know was missing. I remember walking past her office on the way to mine, feeling my heartbeat in my throat for reasons I could neither explain nor deny. It was a curious mixture of fear and longing, a careful consideration of whether the universe had conspired to place me in proximity to her or whether I was merely inventing meaning in the randomness of our routines. I remember the first time I truly noticed her, not just as a presence in a room but as a force that drew everything toward itself. It was one of those ordinary mornings that, at the time, seemed destined to pass without mark. The light filtered through the half-closed blinds, casting slanted stripes across the floor, the kind that made dust motes hang in the air like tiny suspended planets. I had been sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had already gone lukewarm, staring absent-mindedly at the steam curling above the cup. The sound of footsteps, soft and deliberate, crossed the apartment hallway, and there she was. Not a grand entrance, not a flash of brilliance, just her, moving with a quiet certainty that somehow managed to make the world feel both larger and smaller at the same time. My attention, unbidden, followed her. The curve of her shoulders, the gentle tilt of her head, the way her fingers brushed against the edge of the counter. Everything spoke in a language I didn't yet understand but was desperate to learn. From that moment, an almost invisible thread tied me to her. It wasn't passion in the cinematic sense. It wasn't fireworks or a violent storm of emotion. It was more subtle, almost imperceptible at first. A sense of recognition, like finding something you didn't know was missing. I remember walking past her office on the way to mine, feeling my heartbeat in my throat for reasons I could neither explain nor deny. It was a curious mixture of fear and longing, a careful consideration of whether the universe had conspired to place me in proximity to her or whether I was merely inventing meaning in the randomness of our routines. I began to understand that love, at its most profound, is not about dramatic gestures or grand declarations. It is about noticing and remembering and allowing yourself to be transformed by the steady accumulation of small, intimate truths. There was a particular afternoon, early in our acquaintance, when this realization struck me with unusual clarity. I was walking home from work, the city air crisp with the edge of approaching autumn. Leaves, bronze and gold, scuttled across the sidewalk in hurried spirals, caught in the rhythm of the wind. I thought of her, absent-mindedly, and felt an unexpected pang of longing, a physical ache that resonated from my chest down to my toes. It was a moment of self-recognition, the recognition that I had already, without ceremony, begun to inhabit the same emotional landscape as she did. The world, in that instant, seemed both impossibly vast and perfectly contained, with her presence as the quiet axis around which my thoughts rotated. It was not a moment of epiphany so much as a moment of clarity. I understood that I was already irrevocably changed, and that change was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. As the seasons turned, so did the depth of our connection. It was in the unremarkable days, the stretched-out hours of commuting and shared coffee, that love found its most enduring form. I began to notice the rhythm of her life, the subtleties of her moods, the cadences of her laughter and sighs. We moved through ordinary spaces together, and yet those spaces were imbued with a quiet magic. The soft hum of the refrigerator in the background, the occasional bird call through the open window, the tactile sensation of shared warmth in a chilly room. These small, sensory moments became the fabric of our bond, a tapestry woven not from grand gestures, but from the intimacy of awareness. There was a turning point, as there often is in the narrative of love, though it did not arrive with the drama I had imagined in my youth. It arrived as illness, a quiet adversary that crept into our lives with the subtlety of shadow stretching across a room. It was neither sudden nor catastrophic, but persistent, a slow erosion of certainty that demanded attention. The initial days were filled with a strange, suspended anxiety, a hovering awareness that the rhythms we had taken for granted were fragile. I watched her navigate this new reality with a grace and resilience that both humbled and terrified me. In those moments, I realized that love is not measured in ease or in comfort, but in the capacity to bear witness to vulnerability, to inhabit the spaces of suffering alongside another, without turning away or seeking escape. Through this period, my own vulnerabilities were laid bare in ways I had long avoided. I became acutely aware of my fears, my limitations, the gaps in my own strength. And yet, paradoxically, these acknowledgments did not weaken love. They deepened it. I discovered that the act of loving someone fully entails a confrontation with your own impermanence, your own fragility, and that it is precisely this confrontation that allows love to grow in a more enduring, authentic form. I learned that intimacy is not only about shared joy but also about shared endurance, about holding space for another person's pain while acknowledging your own. It was in the quiet, uncelebrated moments, holding her hand as she rested, feeling the rhythm of her breathing, tracing the lines of her face in soft light, that I understood the radical simplicity of love. There were no grand revelations, no cinematic declarations. There was only the accumulation of small, deliberate acts of attention, each one a testimony to the presence of another in your life. I began to see that love is not about possession or even about constant proximity, but about recognition, about a sustained acknowledgement of the other's existence and significance. It is about honoring the ordinary moments as extraordinary simply because they are shared. As the months turned to years, our connection deepened in ways that were both visible and invisible. The world outside continued its indifferent motion, with its insistence on schedules, obligations, and noise, but within the microcosm of our shared attention, there was a kind of sacredness. I would notice the way sunlight shifted across the room at different times of day, and how she responded to it without conscious thought. I would watch the subtle changes in her expression when she was lost in thought, or when a memory passed unbidden across her face. These observations, though seemingly trivial, became the scaffolding of our shared existence. I realized that love, at its most profound, is less about the grand narrative of romantic triumph and more about these quiet, sustained attentions, the kind that accrue over time until they form an unshakable foundation. There was a moment, some years into our life together, when I understood the full depth of this realization. It was an ordinary morning, much like the first time I had noticed her, and yet it felt imbued with a new gravity. I was sitting across from her, the sunlight catching her hair in a way that made it glow, and I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Not for any external circumstance, not for wealth or accomplishment, but simply for the presence of this person who had, in countless subtle ways, become central to my life. I recognized that love is not about dramatic milestones, but about the enduring accumulation of presence and attention, about the patience to notice and the courage to stay. And yet, as life always does, it presented its challenges. Distance, both emotional and physical, tested the resilience of our bond. There were periods when circumstances pulled us apart, when the routine of living and working and existing in separate spaces created a tension that was hard to reconcile. I felt the acute absence of her presence, a tangible void that reverberated through the quiet spaces of my days. I came to understand that love is not the absence of difficulty, but the willingness to persist through it, to maintain connection even when external forces conspire to create separation. In those moments, I learned patience and humility and the quiet power of endurance. Through all of this, the most profound lessons were not dramatic but subtle, etched into the rhythm of daily life. I learned to recognize the beauty of imperfection, the grace of vulnerability, and the necessity of acceptance. I learned that love does not demand perfection or constant satisfaction, but rather a willingness to inhabit the complexities of another person's life alongside your own. I discovered that the act of loving fully requires both courage and surrender, an oscillation between effort and ease, between holding on and letting go. As I reflect now, years later, I understand that the culmination of love is not a single moment of triumph or despair, but a continuous, unfolding awareness. It is the quiet acknowledgement of presence, the willingness to witness another's life with attention and compassion, and the courage to remain open even in the face of inevitable change. I have loved deeply, in ways both joyous and painful, and I have learned that love's true power lies not in possession or control, but in recognition, acceptance, and the enduring commitment to see and honor another person as they truly are. Now, in the quiet hours, I carry these memories not as burdens but as treasures. The fragrance of her hair, the warmth of her hand, the subtle inflections of her expressions, all linger in my awareness, not as reminders of loss but as enduring evidence of connection. I have come to accept the impermanence of life, and with that acceptance, a deeper, more profound understanding of love. It is neither fleeting nor static. It is a living, evolving force that shapes us, challenges us, and ultimately teaches us the capacity for empathy, patience, and grace. I do not claim to have mastered love, nor to have avoided its attendant pains and uncertainties. But I have come to understand that love's worth is measured not in ease or perfection, but in the fidelity of attention, the courage of vulnerability, and the humility to accept both joy and sorrow as integral parts of its fabric. In this quiet, reflective space, I find a sense of peace, a recognition that loving deeply, with openness and honesty, is itself a profound achievement, a testament to the human capacity for connection and resilience. As I sit now, looking back over the years, I feel the gentle continuity of all these moments converging. The first glance, the small attentions, the shared silences, the trials and tribulations, the moments of absence and presence. They have all contributed to a tapestry of experience that is both intricate and simple, ordinary and extraordinary. I understand, finally, that love is not a destination but a journey, one that transforms us in subtle, enduring ways. And in that understanding, I find solace and acceptance, a quiet acknowledgement that the life we have shared, in all its complexity, has been more than enough. It is a strange, wonderful thing to recognize the ordinary as sacred, to see the passage of time not as a loss but as an enrichment. In the warmth of memory, in the subtle sensations that linger like echoes, I find a quiet contentment. I do not seek grand gestures or dramatic affirmations. I seek only the continued presence of awareness, the ongoing appreciation of what has been shared and what remains in the heart. Love, I have learned, is a living testament to the capacity of the human spirit to attend, to endure, and to embrace both joy and sorrow with grace. And so, I continue, carrying these experiences forward not as relics but as active elements of my being. I notice the soft rustle of leaves in the wind, the gentle warmth of sunlight across a room, the quiet resonance of a shared presence. These are not merely sensory experiences. They are reminders of what it means to love and to be loved, to recognize the delicate balance of connection and individuality, and to accept the ebb and flow of life with openness and humility. In this recognition, I find a profound sense of peace, a quiet, enduring affirmation that love, in all its complexity and subtlety, has shaped me in ways both visible and invisible, leaving me with the capacity to live fully, attentively, and with grace.